Life is Strange foregrounds girlhood in ways that have become emblematic of the series. Tender friendships, fragile agency, a constant precarity in the face of a world that is indifferent or outright hostile to female subjectivity. Max and Chloe and later Rachel are not simply protagonists. They are a vessel for a kind of storytelling that lingers on intimacy, care and emotional complexity. Textures so often absent from gaming's portraits of youth. The game's aesthetic and narrative choices construct a world steeped in young feminine experience. But while girlhood stands at the center of the stage, masculinity waits in the wings. Fathers, classmates, teachers, and strangers. They haunt the periphery. These men and boys carve the terrain that Max and Chloe must navigate, shaping the atmosphere of their lives. They rarely dominate the narrative, yet their presence is inescapable. Masculinity becomes a background weather, felt constantly, questioned rarely. And this asymmetry is not incidental, it is not neutral. Life is Strange renders masculinity as context, as force field, as lingering tension in the fabric of adolescence. It is not just a trait of individual characters, but a structural element of the world itself, its institutions, its violence, its expectations. What emerges is a multifaceted portrait of patriarchy, not only in domination but in absence, neglect, pressure and demand. The boys and men of Arcadia Bay span a spectrum, yet across that range masculinity is fragile, inconsistent, and complicit. The game critiques it not through open confrontation but through the subtle weight of relational dynamics. Boys who fail to protect girls, boys who misunderstand them, boys who seek redemption through them or project power onto them. Even those who seem kind, who seem harmless, are often cast in roles that expose their limitations, incapable of connection, blind to the depth of girls' inner lives. This narrative structure, centered on girlhood yet shaped by peripheral masculinities, mirrors a broader cultural shift away from male-centered coming-of-age stories. The boys are not erased but reframed, seen from the outside in, filtered through the emotional, ethical, and psychological responses of the girls around them. Masculinity becomes relational, not default. It is cast as protector, threat, disappointment, and ghost, not a neutral presence, but a contested one, and often a painful one. Nathan is the most tragic and the most dangerous manifestation of wounded masculinity in Life is Strange. Born into wealth, cushioned by privilege, yet visibly unraveling at the seams. His erratic outbursts, his volatility, his violence, they do not emerge from a vacuum. They are the product of a toxic mixture, familial neglect, institutional complicity, untreated trauma. In Nathan, the game sketches a portrait of what happens when vulnerability is given no outlet, when pain is swallowed until it curdles into harm. His affluence shields him from consequence. At Blackwell, his father's influence ensures his violence is dismissed, minimized, and erased. But that same insulation leaves him utterly alone. The few connections he seeks, with Victoria, with Jefferson, are transactional, exploitative, built on power rather than intimacy. His masculinity is contradiction itself, entitled yet insecure, powerful yet powerless. He lashes out not from strength, but from fear, grasping at control in a world that never taught him another way to process shame or pain. Nathan becomes the embodiment of fragility, armed with unearned power. His violence is not simply the mark of a villain, but the core pathology of a psychopath. It is the outcome of a culture that teaches boys to repress, to dominate, to bury mental illness until it explodes. He is a cautionary figure, not only for what he does to others, but for what has been done to him. A boy crushed beneath the very systems meant to protect him, leaving devastation in his wake. If Nathan is volatility, Warren is presented as the antidote. He is the soft boy, the safe boy, the one who hovers on the edges of Max's story with awkward smiles and quiet admiration. He's eager, nerdy, affectionate. He does not demand or harass or intimidate. In a world of chaos and threat, Warren offers himself as a calm alternative. And yet, even Warren cannot escape the weight of masculine expectation. His protectiveness, stepping in to fight Nathan, draping his jacket over Max's shoulders, orbiting her during crisis, sometimes drift into performance. His care is real, but it's also scripted. It echoes the cultural archetype of the boy who proves his worth by saving the girl. His affection feels shallow beside the depth of Max's bond with Chloe, not because it is insincere, but because it is limited. unable to reach the same emotional grounds. Beneath his kindness lies a quiet subtext. If I protect you, you will choose me. The entitlement is not loud, but it lingers. Warren embodies what critics call benevolent masculinity, a gentler mask of power, one that couches expectation in kindness. His range is wide than Nathan's, but still bounded. He wants to care, but on terms that fit the scripts he's inherited. He hasn't yet learned how to love without reward, how to protect without possession. In this way, Warren's limits are not moral but developmental. He's a boy still in the process of becoming, trying, failing, and fumbling toward a masculinity that might one day move beyond performance into true connection. In Before the Storm, Elliot first appears as the archetype of the supportive friend. He listens, he offers help, he hovers with quiet admiration, quite similarly to Warren. At a glance he seems harmless, even sweet, but as the story unfolds his affection sours into fixation, and fixation curdles into obsession. His mask slips during a confrontation with Chloe, his concern has hardened into possessiveness. Elliot's arc unsettles because it shows how quickly affection can tip into coercion when it grows out of entitlement. His love is not rooted in mutual understanding, but in projection, an idea of Chloe, rather than Chloe herself. When she refuses to reciprocate, his support collapses into resentment, his words turn sharp, his concern rephrased as accusation. He becomes an echo of a familiar pattern, where attention blurs into ownership. Elliot reminds us that toxicity in masculinity does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it grows in quieter spaces. In adolescence, boys absorb about persistence as virtue, about love as conquest, about emotional availability as something owed. Elliot's menace lies not in brute force but in manipulation, in the way he rewrites rejection into betrayal. He's the nice guy turned sour, the friend who cannot bear to be refused without demanding a story where he still owed something. Together, Nathan, Warren, and Elliot form a chorus of fragility. They are not caricatures of hypermasculinity, but boys caught in contradictions, told to feel but not too much, to love but never without control, to protect but never to appear weak. Their failings are not only personal, they're systemic, the product of a culture that starves boys of vulnerability, then punishes them when that starvation spills over into harm. In Life is Strange, authority is a double-edged force. It promises mentorship, safety, structure, but more often it delivers coercion, surveillance, and threat. This tension crystallizes in two figures, Mark Jefferson and David Madsen, different in demeanor, different in method, yet bound by the same architecture. Both are men armed with cultural legitimacy, one as the artist's mentor, the other as a soldier guardian. Both blur the line between protection and domination, and both show how patriarchal authority is rarely neutral. At first glance, Jefferson is the ideal of cool authority, charismatic, stylish, revered for his talent. He inhabits the cultural pedestal of the male genius. His brilliance excuses his distance, disguises his manipulations. He speaks in the language of inspiration, luring students into the orbit and the guise of mentorship. But beneath the aura of artistic passion lies something darker, predation dressed as pedagogy. Jefferson's power is not confined to the classroom, it extends to perception itself. As teacher and photographer, he holds the frame. He chooses what is elevated, what is captured, what is erased. The camera, so central to Max's agency, becomes in his hands a weapon of domination, a tool to survey, to immobilize, to violate. When Max uses photography for reflection, Jefferson aestheticizes suffering. He freezes his victims into objects, stripping them of subjectivity until they are no more than art to be consumed. This is not accident, it's design. Jefferson personifies the institutional male gaze, authority eroticized, consent irrelevant. His position shields him, his reputation protects him. He is enabled by the same cultural mythologies that excuse powerful men in the real world, cloaking abuse in the language of genius. His crimes are not aberrant, they are structural. When Jefferson falls, it is not just the defeat of an individual predator, it is an unmasking of the institution that made him possible. His downfall is a reminder that patriarchal authority does not simply fail to prevent abuse, it creates the conditions for it, but pretends to nurture, can just easily consume. David wears a different phase of authority. Discipline, surveillance, a wounded sense of duty, a veteran turned school security guard and stepfather. He's defined by his need to impose order on a world he reads as chaotic, threatening. His methods are rigid, his presence invasive. He monitors rather than communicates, enforces rather than nurtures. And yet David is no predator. He's a man shaped and perhaps broken by systems of control. His authoritarian edge is the residue of military masculinity, the conviction that structure is safety, that detachment is strength, that force is protection. He's not cruel for cruelty's sake, he has simply been trained to equate caring with containment. He struggles to connect not because he feels nothing, but because he has no language for what he feels. David's art exposes the generational tension within masculinity. He was raised to be hard, to repress tenderness, to serve structures larger than himself. But now he finds himself in roles that require softness, father, husband, caretaker, and he falters. His inability to meet Chloe's needs emotionally alienates her, but unlike Jefferson, his intentions are sincere. His failure lies not in malice, but in misrecognition. Here the ghost of William lingers. Her late father's absence defines much of Chloe's grief. His gentle, idealized masculinity setting a standard that David cannot reach. In William, softness is remembered as possibility. In David, authority is the reality that replaces it. Between the two is a cultural fracture, a crisis in what men are supposed to be in the lives of others. David is not irredeemable. He is awkward, rigid, often wrong, but he is capable of change. His arc gestures towards another masculinity, one that may still be clumsy but is willing to learn. Together Jefferson and David form a dyad of patriarchal power, one seductive, the other severe, one cloaked in charisma, the other armored in discipline. Both exert control over the bodies and lives around them. Life is Strange critiques not only the individual actions but the systems that shape and shield them. Because in Arcadia Bay control is never neutral, it is always gendered. It determines whose emotions matter, whose bodies are visible, and who has the authority to define what counts as truth. Before the Storm offers another lens on masculinity, not through dominance or predation, but through obligation and care. In Drew and Mikey North, the game gives us a rare portrait of brotherhood under pressure. Masculinity forged not in conquest but in survival. Not in violence but in tenderness. The relationship makes visible the invisible burdens placed on boys in working class families, where fractured systems force children to grow up too soon. The North household is marked by instability. The father is loving but unreliable, struggling with money, struggling to hold the world together but keeps breaking in his hands. In that absence, Drew steps forward, not because he wants to, but because he has to. He becomes man of the house by necessity, embodying a masculinity of endurance and sacrifice, defined by how much weight he can carry. On the surface, Drew looks like the archetype: football player, tough, stoic, the kind of masculinity school culture praises. But beneath that armor, his aggression is not entitlement, it is desperation. His hardness is not himself, but for his brother. Mikey, by contrast, is open and imaginative, a Dungeons and Dragons player with a gentle curiosity about the world. He is everything Drew cannot afford to be, and that is the point. Drew shields him, absorbs the trauma and the stress, so Mikey can remain soft, creative and unbroken. The dynamic challenges dominant portrayals of masculinity in two ways. First, it shows how masculine roles are shaped by context, not essence. Drew's toughness is not toxic posturing, but a response to economic and familiar necessity. Second, it shows masculinity as relational. Drew and Mikey are not locked in competition or hierarchy. Their roles adapt to each other, bound by love and survival. And in moments Drew steps even further. He doesn't just protect Mikey, he engages with him. He sits at the table, listens to his campaigns, encourages his imagination. In doing so, he interrupts the patriarchal script he inherited. Lacking role models himself, Drew chooses to become one. He refuses a cycle of silence and suppression, creating instead a space where Mikey can be wholly himself. This portrayal of masculinity, burdened yet tender, hard yet relational, is among the most hopeful in the series. It suggests that while patriarchy weighs heavily, it does not dictate everything. Even in precarity, even in absence, new models can emerge. Through love, responsibility, and emotional risk, masculinity can be remade. Behind every expression of masculinity there lies a process of modeling. Boys do not simply become men by growing older, they learn, they mimic, they internalize. Masculinity is shaped through observation and repetition by the models available in the environment and by the constraints that the environment enforces. Developmental psychology makes this clear. Erik Erikson's stages of development describe adolescence as a time of crisis, identity versus role confusion. It is the age where young people search for coherence between who they feel they are and who they are told they must be. Oliver Bandura's social learning theory adds another layer. Modeling is not passive imitation. Boys absorb lessons by watching, by noticing what is rewarded, what is punished, and what earns legitimacy. In patriarchal culture, the lessons are predictable. Control is rewarded, stoicism is praised, strength is valorized. Tenderness, vulnerability, softness, these are punished, dismissed, or feminized. Sociologist R.W. Connell describes hegemonic masculinity as a cultural exalted form of manhood. Dominance, heterosexuality, economic success, emotional restraint. Few boys can fully inhabit the script, but all are measured against it. The result is a widespread sense of inadequacy, compensated for through aggression, withdrawal, or overcompensation. These scripts are not innate, they are performed, reinforced and policed. When boys cannot access healthier models, they turn elsewhere for guidance, for belonging, for permission. They turn to peers, to fragile communities, to media culture, to failed mentors who promise empowerment while fighting the same patriarchal chains. But what happens when boys grow up with only warped role models? The answer is fragmentation. Some project power where they feel none, masking fear with anger. Some internalize shame, believing their needs make them weak. Others retreat into communities, online or offline, that offer identity through exclusion, dominance, or misogyny. Life is Strange does not offer easy solution, but it listens. It listens to the boy who protects his brother, to the boy who thinks kindness should earn him love, to the boy who mistakes obsession for affection, to the boy who lashes out because no one taught him another way. It listens to the silence between outbursts, the longing behind cruelty, the weight carried by those who seem strong. This is the silent chorus of boyhood, to the demand to be centered but the plea to be understood. A reminder that masculinity is not only power or threat, but a fragile inheritance, fractured and stained by fear. In recognizing that fragility, perhaps there is a place to begin again, not by discarding masculinity, but by remaking it into something livable, something lovable, and something all around human.